Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for How Can You Protect Sensitive Data in Education webcast. I am Kristen Hinsberger, the Senior Programs and Events Manager for ESET North America. Please note, this is a live presentation. It is being recorded and will be available following the conclusion of the webcast. If you have any questions for the presenters, please submit them through the Bright Talk question tab at the top, and we will address them during the Q&A session. At this time, I'd like to introduce our presenter, Lysa Myers, Security Researcher at ESET. Lysa began her tenure in malware research labs in the weeks before the Melissa virus outbreak. She has watched both the malware landscape and the security technologies used to prevent threats grow and change dramatically. Because keeping up with all this change can be difficult for even the most tech-savvy users, Lysa enjoys explaining security issues in an approachable manner for companies and consumers alike. Lysa, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Kristen. Hello and welcome, everyone. Today we're going to talk about how you can protect sensitive data in education. And we'll review the latest Tech Validate survey findings about IT security challenges faced by educational institutions and the real-world responses that are being deployed to protect systems and the very valuable data they process. A quick introduction. My name is Lysa Myers, and I'm a security researcher for ESET. If you have any questions at any point, you can email me at lysa.myers@eset.com, or you can follow me at Twitter at Lysa Myers. We'll also have a period of questions and answers towards the end. That said, a little background about me. I was in school myself in the early days of the internet. I first got into interactive computing back in the day of BBSs, which is bulletin board system. I got my very first email address in about 1992, which for those of you who have been at this a really long time may be wondering, it was not CompuServe. I was kind of a late adopter amongst my friends, believe it or not. It was pretty fortunate that the school that I was at was pretty technologically savvy. I was on the yearbook staff in high school, contributing to producing one of the first CD-ROM yearbooks in the country. I hung out with those kids that were those digital mischief makers, though they're all happily, gainfully employed doing useful things now. And they never really did anything more than silly pranks, which means that they probably had a head start on the whole security thing at my school. But not every school has that advantage for a variety of reasons. And I truly feel for IT people in school now. There were just a small handful of computer users new than many years ago when I was in school. It's got to be orders of magnitude more difficult to administrate a student body full of students that are frequent computer users. But that's what I'm here to help you do safely. First of all, let's start with a brief overview of what we'll be covering today. First, we recently participated with Tech Validate on a survey for IT security people in a variety of educational organizations. I'll talk a bit about what that survey found, like what things concern IT people at schools, and what the threat landscape is out there. Then we'll talk about what makes schools unique from other kinds of organizations. Schools are different for a few reasons. For starters, their structure is different from other types of organizations. They've got a lot of different components that other businesses don't need to deal with, and this needs to be reflected in their protection strategies. There can be a pretty wide range of ages and abilities in schools. Schools also have a lot of different regulations to contend with because they do so much for so many. They retain a lot of information that needs to be protected according to a variety of different rules. And how is it even possible to retain all that information in a sense of openness of information without leaving all your data open to the wild web of miscreants to pilfer? And there are a few things that will not be on the agenda. For instance, the specifics of regulations. In different areas and for different types of organizations, there are simply different rules, and so I can't really cover what everyone needs to deal with, but I'll try to cover what most folks need to be aware of. And as the acronym says, I'm not a lawyer, and every organization will need to do things slightly differently. This is also meant to be kind of a brief explanation of what to do, meant to start you on your way to research further. It's meant to get you asking questions, which you can then answer in a way that works in your environment. I'm not going to get super technical about how to implement this stuff because of the different rules and because schools will necessarily be organized differently and because organizations will all be using slightly different software or hardware. The how-to on dealing with a Windows-only network would be different than dealing with Linux servers or Mac machines or iOS or Android tablets. A lot of schools are just starting to get this information, and they can make a lot of progress simply by making a few simple and inexpensive changes to help them become less of a low-hanging fruit. So, I got a couple questions here to gauge who I'm talking to and what kind of things that you guys have dealt with. For example, this first question, are you a user in an educational environment, or are you an administrator in the IT sense? So what is your role in education? Are you a teacher, parent, student, IT staff, other staff, or something else entirely? I'll turn that over to Kristen.
All right, great. So you can answer the question at any time. Again, what is your role in education? Teacher, parent, student, IT staff, or other? So I'm going to give everyone some time to answer that. Again, just to give us an idea of who we're speaking to on this webcast, what is your role in education?
Well, it's interesting. We have kind of an interesting mix here. There's more teachers than I would have expected, but there's also a lot of IT staff, and even a couple students, it looks like. All right.
Now it looks like we have a second question here. So have you ever had a security incident? A, yes, breach cause. B, yes, breach caused by hacker. C, yes, other. D, not that I know of. And E, I don't know. So let's give everyone some time to answer that. So have you ever had a security incident, whether that be, at your place of work or personally? So A, yes, breach caused. B, yes, breach caused by hacker. C, yes, other. D, not that you know of. Or E, I don't know.
Interesting. At first we had 100% I don't know, which I thought was very interesting and very honest.
Yeah.
That's a tricky one for anyone to do. But it looks like we have a good number now of yes, other as well. I'm kind of wondering if I wish I could have done a bunch of questions so I could have asked more specifically, but I'm wondering how many of those are like malicious users, either students or employees or something along those lines, or just like lost laptops or lost devices. But anyway, we can move on to the next one. So before we're going to get into what makes schools unique, let's get a picture of what's going on in schools from a cybercrime perspective. There are currently more than 85 million people who are participating in education, either as students or as employees in U.S. schools alone. In 71 publicly reported breaches in education in 2013-2014, very close to 4 million records were lost. Compare this to government, which had about 73 breaches in the same time period, but only a bit over 500,000 records were lost. Whether this means that government has better protection or fewer users or simply less valuable information for cyber criminals, it's kind of hard to say. It's interesting that both of those figures are less than retail and medical, which are generally considered most problematic for breaches, probably in part because they have such an incredibly massive user bases. And we have to consider, though, that retail had a particularly bad year with Target and Home Depot breaches. They combined to contributed 100 million people's credit card information, plus another 70 million email and physical addresses. In short, there are a whole lot of people out there whose data is risk. Seems like a lot of folks out there in this audience as well have had quite a bit of experience with breaches too, and a lot of organizations are having a very hard time protecting their information. And in light of this, what are the concerns that IT staff are having with trying to protect people's information? So many schools and universities use ESET security software to help them protect their computer systems, so we decided to survey people who are involved with protecting schools for insight into how they view security challenges that they face. There were a variety of questions, which you'll see more information about if you keep an eye on the Lysa security blog. I'll highlight a few of the questions that I thought were the most interesting. First question here is, what security challenges did your organization face when evaluating and deploying ESET? Now, keep in mind that these three questions are multiple choice, so the answers will add up to more than 100%, and that's why. The top three answers for this question are protecting student and organizational data and intellectual property, with 79% of the respondents choosing that answer. Balancing productivity and protection, with 47%, and compliance standards with 19%. Those results aren't real surprising on the one hand, but they're also kind of comforting on the other, at least to me. The things that these folks were most concerned with wasn't some technology or other or complying with rules, but with actually protecting people and their data, making sure that people aren't hindered by their security policies. And when these folks were asked about how deploying security software helped their bottom line, the answers were, again, not real surprising, but I found them rather interesting. The most popular answers were not about avoiding fines or following rules, again, but about reducing costs and improving productivity of their users, plus maintaining trust of their community. You can see here the most popular answers are reducing IT overhead with 55%, helping end user productivity with 45%, and avoiding damage to your reputation, goodwill, and community trust with 39%. And when it comes to what folks or IT folks are planning to attend to in the next 12 months, the answers were a little more surprising to me, but kind of cool. The number one answer, unsurprisingly, was student devices on campus with 48%. That's sort of a huge potential security pitfall, so it makes sense that this would be something that needs to be addressed. Probably not just in the next 12 months, but I guess probably in the past 12 months and then the 12 months after next. New hardware keeps changing all the time, and it's a constantly moving target. So the second most popular answer was BYOD, bring your own device, for faculty and staff. It's sort of a variant of the first answer. Mobile devices are tricky things in a controlled network environment. The third answer was one that surprised me. Delivering online education, including the mass online classes, with 24%. Now, this is a really growing area, but apparently it's growing even more than I realized. It being web-based and publicly facing, that's going to be especially tricky. Naturally, how you go about protecting that will depend on what sort of platform you choose and that sort of thing. Schools provide a whole lot of different services for a whole lot of different types of people. They are obviously a center for learning, but they can also include a health clinic, a research lab, a retail store. Occasionally, they even function like an apartment complex or hotel. And because of this, they necessarily collect a lot of personally identifying information. Depending on the age of the student or the organization's specific setup, they may have health information, financial information, social security numbers, or email or physical addresses of the students. Most schools operate with the goal of a certain amount of openness of information, and they may also have research information or partnerships with government entities too. Generally speaking, those government partnerships and intellectual property will necessitate even more security awareness, but you don't lose the valuable research data or lead to a breach of the government entities that you're working with. Now, compounding the complications for folks trying to protect educational environments is the wide variety of levels of security savvy amongst various users, which generally includes students, teachers, staff, and parents. Students can be anywhere from extreme novices and extremely advanced, depending on things like age, level, and skill. And generally speaking, users in a corporate setting also are old enough to know better than to try and break the network infrastructure intentionally. Something about that frontal cortex not being fully baked in teenagers or the threat of being fired, I guess. Teachers are hopefully not extreme novices, but they may be new to security concerns or a lot of the newer technology. Staff may also be at a variety of levels. I'm hoping your IT staff is somewhere in that expert area. Parents may have a variety of skill levels too, but it's a lot more difficult to access them for training, so you're basically stuck with the level of understanding that they're currently at. All of these people maybe need to be considered users at some point to some extent, and those users will probably need to access resources. Because of all this different information they cover, schools are in a unique position of being affected by a variety of different compliance regulations too. If you deal with credit cards, you may need to deal with PCI compliance. And then if you have healthcare information, there's HIPAA compliance. And there's FERPA, which covers student information, and CIPA, which protects minor children. That all breaks down to being aware of and protecting personally identifiable information, which I'll collectively call your sensitive data. Pardon me while we have some technical difficulties here. There we go. A lot of those regulations I just mentioned are about is preventing data from leaving your organization. That's to say, data leakage. Those leaks happen due to malware getting onto your systems, or they may happen because hackers get into your networks due to social engineering like phishing, or from people within your organization who are either accidentally or intentionally exfiltrating your data. There are a few things you can do to prevent or at least minimize data leakage. There's the technology stuff you may or may not already know about, like security software. There are also technology strategies that you can employ that will really help and will in some cases make it easier for you in terms of fines or for having to disclose if you do get breached. And then, believe it or not, there are ways to get your users themselves to help you. First, let's talk about a few of those security strategies. They say it's best to keep an open mind, but not so open your brains fall out. Likewise, it's important to be only open within reason with your information. Teachers and staff payroll information or students' health information, for instance, those things should be restricted pretty heavily, and they should be physically and logistically separate from the information you want shared more widely. Things like research projects, which you would like shared to a certain degree, you may want to restrict to certain people or departments. In order to do that, you need to segment your information in your networks that only the people that need to have access have it. And in order to keep things separate, you need to determine who needs what. And once you do that, you need to be sure people are who they say they are. In other words, you need to authenticate your users. And lastly, to protect data when it's not in use, you need to encrypt that data. To protect all that valuable information, it's a good idea to start with segmentation. There's a phrase we like to use for a security concept, which is the principle of least privilege. That basically means that you don't give people access to resources or services they don't specifically need. So using students as an example, obviously they don't need access to certain resources like other people's grades or their healthcare or financial information. They may not need certain services at certain times too. There are a bunch of questions you can ask about how students use machines in class or in labs, for example. Like, do they need web access when they're in the classrooms, or is that too disruptive? Do they need to have admin rights on lab machines to do their classwork, or do they need the ability to install files or not? Do they need access to all ports, or can you restrict certain kinds of traffic? You can also segment by user type or by people's function as a user. Teachers probably don't need to access healthcare information. Healthcare folks probably don't need to access grades. Students don't need to access payroll information, etc. Since this is a pretty important concept for school, it's because there's so many discrete functions, it's a good idea to break this down even further. We talked about breaking things down by users, using students as an example. And that's one important way to break things down, but there are others that are at least as important. You can view things as per machine or per network too. Machines on a dorm network may have one set of privileges based on what people do in that location. I've heard some university IT folks say that they restrict access to anything other than the outward-facing internet for folks in their dorms, for instance. If the students are in a lab or a classroom, that may be a separate network, and that may have another set of restrictions. Your payroll system should probably be inaccessible to the other parts of the network. Maybe there are systems that outside vendors need to access, or maybe there are specific machines that should only be accessed from certain areas, or certain machines that are specifically restricted to a small number of people, or what have you. more questions for you to answer. And naturally, this necessitates you knowing about all of those machines, that there's not some antiquated computer that's moldering in a basement that's connected to a network that nobody knows about, or who knows how many vulnerabilities and a menagerie of different malware infections. A thorough inventory may actually be step one in the process if you've not already done this. The gist is, the more ways that you can break things down without hampering people's daily work, the more damage control you have available if something goes wrong, like a malware infection or a hacker breaking into your network. Another thing that's incredibly helpful for minimizing leakage is encryption. And a quick note about encryption and regulation. Using encryption can make it easier on you if your network does get breached. With HIPAA, for example, if you do have a breach but your information is encrypted, you have what's called a safe harbor. And that means you may not have to publicly disclose the fact that you had a breach. And the data is not useful to your attackers because they can't use it. But as we know from the survey that people are more concerned with protecting users and maintaining their trust, I'm sure that's a lesser concern. So let me rephrase it. If someone gets into your system with mischief and mayhem in mind, if all the good bits are encrypted whenever they're not in use, the miscreant is not going to be able to use that data to harm your users. When I say you should encrypt data at rest, that means encrypting files and folders on the hard disk or in the cloud. When I say data in motion, that means any data that gets sent across the network, whether that's by file share or by email or by the web or going to the cloud. Ideally, that encryption happens on your end, not with the service provider, and only you or your users have that encryption key. No outside entities should ever have access to that key. That's when the encryption is considered end-to-end. One way to encrypt particularly sensitive traffic that's becoming more and more popular with a variety of different kinds of organizations is what's called a VPN. It's a virtual private network. This creates a tunnel where you can access data over the network, where the data is encrypted as you access it. This is a really important step if people are accessing your network remotely, like from home or from mobile devices. More technical difficulties. Sorry. Oh, there you go. Okay. I'm assuming you haven't been living under a rock for the last few weeks, and you're aware of the whole iCloud incident with celebrity photos being stolen and posted online. These folks put their data into the hands of a third party, and some miscreants were able to brute force their way into those celebrities' accounts and steal their data, which means pictures in this case. I'm not saying this is the celebrity's fault at all. I'm sure those folks thought their data was protected because they had to enter in their password, but it wasn't. Bad people were able to break into their accounts and collect the photos. Maybe the people whose data was stolen had crummy passwords, or maybe they had secret questions that were too easy to Google the answers to. But that's sort of beside the point. Either way, that data was accessible to the bad guys because it was on the internet, and now it's out there forever. The cloud is another word for someone else's computer. You need to treat it that way and prepare accordingly. And by that I mean don't put things in the cloud you don't want in a third party's hands. Decrypting things that you put in the cloud is a fine thing to do when that option is available, for instance, but consider that because it's someone else's computer, you may not always have access to it at the exact moment you need it. And speaking of passwords, let's talk real briefly about how to do strong authentication. First, you need to be mandating that your users are picking good passwords. Those passwords should have a minimum of 8 characters, including upper and lowercase letters, numbers, and special characters. And you should be having them change their passwords every few months. And in the background, on the administration side, there are other things you can do. You should not be storing the passwords themselves, but salting and hashing the passwords. Hashing is basically running the password through an algorithm, which gives you a number that you can store, that you can compare with when a user re-enters that password each time they log on. Salting means that you add a random bit of data to that password before you hash it, so that it's even more difficult for hackers to reverse engineer even more crummy passwords if there is a breach. And lastly, in some cases, passwords alone may not be enough, and you'll want to do something even more secure. For more sensitive information, you want to use multiple factors of authentication. Picture here, you see an example of a second factor of authentication, which sends a temporary key to your user's cell phone or some other device so that they have to enter not only their password, but this randomly generated key that proves they are who they say they are. We recently had a webinar, which is a primer on authentication, if you want more detailed information on that. There are other ways data can leak out of your organization that people may not think of. Wi-Fi is becoming a fact of life. There's sort of an expectation that wherever you go, there'll be a Wi-Fi network that you can access, especially at work. But that Wi-Fi can be an easy way for attackers to get into your network if it's not properly secured. Depending on the size of your organization, there are different options for how to do this. But the main thing to know is that web protocol is not enough. There are tools out there that can be easily found that will allow attackers to break this kind of encryption. You can find WPA2 on modern routers, and this is a far better way to go. Disabling the ability to copy and paste or to print data may seem like a fairly draconian thing to do, but in some cases, like in certain departments that are covered by those alphabet soup compliance regulations, may be something you want to do. BYOD is kind of the buzzword of the day for quite a while now. Bringing your own device to work makes accessing data so much easier and more convenient. We can access information faster for more of the day, whenever and wherever we need to. But is it worth the cost? Lots of breaches, maybe the ones you guys have had, happen because people clicked on links that they shouldn't have. Many breaches happen because a device like a laptop or a phone or what have you were lost. What could you do in that situation? Letting your users bring their own devices to school increases risk, but that risk can be mitigated. Ideally, if devices are connecting to your school network, or at least into more sensitive areas, it should be scanned for security vulnerabilities or for the presence of malware or other potentially problematic apps. And devices that connect with the sensitive areas of the network should be wipeable remotely, and it should be the security people initiating it, not device's owner. And we have another question. I'm curious to see how many of you folks out there are employing some or all of these already. So I'll turn this back over to Kristen.
So do you use these protection strategies? A is yes, all three. B is yes, some of them. C is not yet, but I'll get right on it. D is no. And E is I don't know. So I'm going to give everyone some time to answer. Again, do you use these protection strategies? All three, some of them, not yet, no, or I don't know.
So far, I'm impressed. There's quite a few people saying that they use some of these strategies already. We have an increasing number of people saying they either know or they don't know. Hopefully that you guys can take some of these back with you when you go back to your work or whatever. Yeah, it looks like quite a few folks are just saying yes, some of them. That's very cool. Anyway. There you go. Oops. I have more technical. Sorry about that. Oh, it looks like that one is not coming back for some reason. Anyway, now that we're thoroughly covered the technology side of protecting data, we get to what's arguably the most important part of protecting data, the people part. There's little point in fortifying the castle if you haven't told people how not to let attackers in the front gate. One area in which schools have a decided advantage is that people come to school expecting to learn. Even teachers are expected to get regular training. Whether you do it yearly or per term, you should be covering rules as well as any new technology they need to know about. And where do you get those rules and stuff to teach your teachers, staff, and students? They come from the acceptable use policy, of course. An acceptable use policy is a document that you create that defines what's good and bad behavior when using school networks. When you're creating it, don't forget to cover loopholes as much as possible, as students are incredibly creative when it comes to interpreting rules. Once you decide what's good and bad behavior, you need to define what the consequences are if you break the rules of good behavior. And what those consequences are will probably depend a lot on the age of the students, regulations in your area, and what your administration and community will support. And of course, this is something that everybody must sign saying that they understand and they'll abide by these rules before that they can access your network. Okay, since that was kind of a lot of ground to cover, let's run through all that one more time. Universities are unique. They have an awful lot of ground to cover protecting people's personally identifiable information while maintaining an open flow of information. The main thing you need to do is to prevent data leakage. The best thing you can do is by segmenting your network and applying the principle of least privilege to make sure people only access what they truly need to access, and then by authenticating that users are who they say they are. And then you encrypt as much data as you can when it's in rest or in motion. Add to this your security software, which includes firewalls, anti-malware software, etc. And don't forget, data leakage also applies to mobile devices and to the cloud, so they need to be protected too. And lastly, you're not alone in this. By creating acceptable use policies and providing regular security training, you can help students, teachers, and staff help you. Thank you all for listening. If you have any questions, you can email me at lysa.myers@eset.com. And if you would like to read more from myself and the other ESET researchers, you can check out the We Live Security blog. I'll turn this back over to you, Kristen.
Great, and if you want to answer a question right now and have it answered live, I see we have a few questions in there, but we have time for definitely some more if anyone wants to add a question. And then before we move on, I'd like to let the audience know if they would like to take a closer look at their security future, they can feel free to request one of the following in this next polling question. They can request access to the Passmark Competitive Analysis Report. They can request a free business edition trial of ESET software, which includes our remote administrator, or they can request our Global Monthly Threat Report, which shares security articles, the top 10 threats from the previous month, and how to deal with them. So you can answer that at any point during the rest of the webcast. And right now we're going to jump to some questions from our audience. Lysa, it looks like we've got some questions in there. Do you want to go ahead and take a look at them?
Yeah, sure. Let's see. The first one, it says, can we get a copy of the presentation slides? If you email me, the lysa.myers@eset.com, I can send you a copy of that. And the next one, what do you think education should change about their security practices first? It probably depends on which of those strategies you're using, but if I'm assuming that you're starting from square one and you haven't implemented anything yet, I'm hoping that you have some sort of security software like AV software, firewall, depending on the size of your organization, maybe network intrusion prevention, that sort of thing. Assuming that you have that in place, I would say the best thing you can do is to start with segmentation. If you do have some sort of breach or malware event or some security incident, that's a really good way to limit the damage. So if you have something that gets into a small subnetwork of your system rather than the entire school network, it's going to be a whole lot easier to fix than if it got all over the place. So I think that would be the first thing. And in terms of cost, that is probably the least expensive in terms of purchasing software, that sort of thing. This is something that the only expense is your time and effort. What do you think is the weakest link in education? Oh, that's a tricky one. I would say that user education is probably the weakest link for most organizations, as there is kind of a thought in the industry, at least the security side of things, that user education is not necessarily worthwhile. It's like you're not going to fix everyone, so why even bother trying? But if you are able to take security information and kind of boil it down to something that's really simple and easy to follow, people can make some decent changes, just kind of incremental changes. They don't need to do everything all at once. Just kind of give them one chunk at a time, and they can learn as they go. Last one. is how can we protect legacy machines? And that's another super tricky question. I know from working in research labs that there are a lot of machines that are bouldering in basements and having horrible things going on with them and just incredibly outdated software. If there's any way that you can disconnect those from the network, that's obviously the most thorough way of doing it. Anytime that you can kind of limit those more vulnerable machines from being able to access anything else, so again, you get into segmentation, that's ideal. And beyond that, you want to be real diligent about encryption because, again, knowing that the software is super outdated and probably full of all sorts of holes, and who knows what else, you want to encrypt that data. And encryption is not a silver bullet. When it's in use, it's still accessible, and that's kind of what we saw with Target, is that they were able to grab the credit card information while it was in use and exfiltrate it out to the bad guys. So it decreases but doesn't eliminate the possibility of that data getting exfiltrated. And if it does get exfiltrated, generally speaking, it's a lot less useful than it would be otherwise. Beyond that, I think those are the main things. I think if you do that, you're going to decrease the possibility of problems to a pretty decent degree. It's not perfect, but security generally is not ever going to be 100% perfect. You're just looking to make it too expensive for bad guys to try and take your data. That's the main gist of things. It looks like.
Great. Well, it looks like that's all our questions we have for today. So thank you all for your participation in today's webcast. We hope that you found it valuable. You can rate this webcast or share it through your social media channels in your Bright Talk window. And for more information on ESET endpoint security products, you can go to eset.com. Thank you, and that concludes our webcast.